Dawn, there are deep concerns in Glynn County about the integrity of the police department and conflicts of interest in this case. Still, the department never requested the GBI come in and help investigate Arbery's death.
Glynn County police officers responded the day of Arbery's death. The video shows Travis McMichael's father, Gregory, in the bed of the truck when Travis shot Arbery. Gregory worked at the department in the 80s and spent more than 2 decades as an investigator with the Brunswick DA. Even with this perceived conflict, the police department never formally requested the independent GBI take over the case, according to the GBI. That changed yesterday at the direction of the governor. This is not the first time the Glynn County Police Department has faced criticism. In 2018, body camera video shows responding officers laughing with a former colleague of theirs, Robert Sasser, during a domestic violence call. Sasser's ex-wife called police because she says the former cop tried to break in and threatened to kill her and a man she was with. Weeks later, authorities determined Sasser killed her and that man before committing suicide. Separately, an unrelated indictment unsealed days after Arbery's death in February accused Chief John Powell of perjury and violating his oath of office. The charges come from Powell's actions during a GBI investigation into the now disbanded Glynn County Drug Unit. Powell is suspended right now. The accusations of widespread corruption led a Republican state senator to move forward with a referendum for voters to give their opinion whether to disband the agency.
The previous issues with the department explain why many in that community are skeptical the agency could have ever done a fair and unbiased investigation.
We told you yesterday that the Georgia Bureau of Investigation decided to take over the case, and now the Justice Department says the FBI is stepping in.
The writing was on the wall earlier this week when the GBI took over the case, given the very public statements from the governor and the GBI director. Now, 2 men are in jail. A judge officially denied bond for Gregory and Travis McMichael this afternoon. The former law enforcement officer and his son are charged in the shooting death of Ahmaud Arbery. Graphic cell phone video led to a national uproar over the case and the fact that no one had been arrested. Earlier this week, the governor and the GBI director called the prosecutor on the case and asked if they could help.
In a perfect world, would we prefer to have been asked to become involved in February? Of course. But sometimes it isn't a perfect world. So we have to deal with the situation as it's placed in front of us.
The GBI can only come into an investigation like this at the request of the district attorney or the investigating agency. The Glynn County Police Department never made that request. Tom Durden, the prosecutor now over this case, is the one who made that request earlier this week. In his remarks today, the director did not make it seem like the GBI is working on this case now with the Glynn County Police Department. Instead, he says they took their investigative file and essentially started over with what the Glynn County Police Department had done. It's peculiar given the fact that the GBI normally works hand in hand with the original investigating agency. This shooting happened back in February, on February 23rd. Part of the reason people are so fed up is that they felt like this arrest should have happened much earlier. The prosecutor now on the case is a man named Tom Durden. He is in the Atlantic Circuit. He got the case on April 13th. Then fast forward to May 5th. That video leaked out early that morning. And then later that morning, Tom Durden said he would in fact take this case to a grand jury. That same day, the governor saw the video, the attorney general saw the video, the GBI director saw the video. All of them shared disgust at what it showed.
A lot of the criticism in this case has been about District Attorney George Barnhill of the Waycross Judicial Circuit. Now, he was the DA who received the case by appointment after the DEA in Brunswick recused herself because of a conflict. Now, for the first time, we have a look at why he, too, stepped away from the case. Last night, in response to that public release of that letter we just read you right there, a spokesperson for Georgia's Attorney General Chris Carr sent this statement that reads in part, "It has become clear to our office that the appointment should not have been accepted, and it is appropriate that he is no longer involved in the case."
Tom Durden recused himself from the case.
Dawn, the case is now in the hands of Cobb County DA Joyette Holmes. Attorney General Chris Carr says the move is more about resources than anything else.
Yeah, I was shocked.
Today, he appointed another DA on the case. Brunswick DA Jackie Johnson recused herself 4 days after the shooting. Carr then gave the case to Waycross DA George Barnhill. Carr now says Barnhill withheld information from him, including that Barnhill recommended police not charge the McMichaels the day after the shooting.
A new video revealed this week appears to show a man who looks like Arbery inside a home minutes before he was killed on February 23rd.
Officers and 911 dispatchers became relatively familiar with this Glynn County neighborhood over the last 7 months. A series of incident reports and 911 call logs sum up the problems. That caller goes on to tell dispatch, quote, the offender was reaching into his pocket when he ran. The McMichaels later used this as the reason why they thought Arbery was armed.
There he goes right now.
As that call unfolded, Greg McMichael told officers, quote, he was in his front yard and saw the suspect from the break-ins. He and his son grabbed guns, got in the truck, and called 911. During that call, McMichael is heard yelling at Arbery and his son Travis.
I don't know what street we're on. Stop right there. Stop. Travis.
At least part of the McMichaels' defense is that they were chasing someone they thought to be responsible for several break-ins. Once again, those reports prove there wasn't a series of burglaries, at least not reported to police.
Gregory McMichael, he had the badge, he had the gun, but legally wasn't allowed to make an arrest. Now, we learned that today in the release of these records.
Gregory McMichael had a long career with the Brunswick District Attorney's Office. He retired last year after working there for 24 years. But records released today by the Georgia agency that accredits law enforcement shows for at least 5 of those years, McMichael failed to complete his state-mandated training. And the council twice revoked his power of arrest. It first happened in 1997 when Georgia's Peace Officer Standards and Training Council discovered McMichael had only completed 14 hours of his required 20 hours of training. That training he failed to complete included use of deadly force and firearms requalification. He said personal reasons prevented him from completing the work. Ongoing health problems, surgeries, mounting medical bills, and having to file for bankruptcy.
The spokeswoman there with the agency said the file is now under investigation. That status change happened last Thursday, the same day the Georgia Bureau of Investigation arrested McMichael on the murder charge.
An attorney for the man who owns the unfinished home in the Ahmaud Arbery case shared new videos today. They show 3 sets of different people on the property in the months before Arbery's death.
2 kids are seen riding up on bikes and walking into the garage. The second video is from November 17th of last year. The third set of videos are from December 17th of last year. The man walks through the home for a couple minutes. He walks back out the front door and then begins to jog down the street. It's from about 9:30 that night. The final video is from February 23rd, minutes before Arbery died. His family confirms this is him. The attorneys say it proves he stopped by the home during his jog. They say he committed no crime before leaving on his own.
One of the attorneys for Arbery's family has just responded to these new videos. He said, quote, Ahmaud Arbery seems to be the only one who is presumed to be a criminal and ultimately the only one murdered based on that presumption. He goes on to say specifically about that video of the children there you saw at the beginning, quote, these children were not implicated in any crimes due to their presence at this location. No white person ever was, end quote. In order for the McMichaels to have a legal right to make a citizen's arrest on Arbery that day, state law says they must have direct knowledge of a felony. None of these videos prove Arbery, or anyone else for that matter, ever committed a felony on that property.
Greg McMichael told police that Brian helped in the pursuit of Arbery on February 23rd, according to the incident report. He denies being involved despite filming while closely following behind Arbery. He also says he was unarmed. Some say this noise is a gun being cocked.
Arbery's attorneys are hopeful a grand jury indicts Brian on criminal charges. Brian's attorney says he thinks the GBI will clear him. That state agency, though, only telling me, quote, the case is very active.
Wright Gasaway dug through years of incident reports and 911 calls. And
first, Arbery was not the first person Greg McMichael and his son confronted about these crimes. Second, the only accused thief ever mentioned by name or description is a white man.
Hey, this is Greg McMichael. I'm retired chief investigator with the DA's office.
At the time of this call, there had been a few theft incidents in their neighborhood. The first one happened in May of 2019. The caller said her son took money and a speaker from her. A month later, the caller blamed a man by name. To be clear, that name was not Ahmaud Arbery. WTOC reviewed years' worth of incident reports and 911 calls within a 2-mile radius of Satilla Shores. All 9 thefts we found happened since last May. It's important to note these thefts have continued since Arbery's death. 3 victims blamed a white man by name. He has a lengthy criminal history. He also lived only a quarter of a mile from the McMichaels in Satilla Shores.
Stop right there! Stop!
Arbery would be dead within minutes of that call you just heard. The McMichaels say they thought he was an armed thief. No incident report I've seen from this neighborhood ever describes a thief who looked like Arbery.
Now, following Arbery's death, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp signed a hate crime bill into law.
The prosecutor revealed a second investigation that's now pending against Brian.
As of yesterday, the GBI has opened an additional parallel investigation into sex crimes.
We do know back in July, when the judge denied bond for Brian, he did so partly because of the sex crime allegations. So in that context, here's what we know about that investigation and how it's become a factor.
New details released in court documents explain why attorneys for William Roddy Bryan say a GBI sex crimes investigation isn't credible. In an October 27th motion filed by Bryan's defense, his attorney wrote, quote, "The so-called GBI investigation of so-called sex crimes over the past several months, moreover, has been nothing less than a joke." A spokeswoman for the GBI told me on Tuesday that the GBI stands by earlier statements made about the case and that the case is now in the hands of Brunswick District Attorney Jackie Johnson. The GBI posted this statement on Twitter to say that the sex crimes case was referred to them from the Glenn County Police Department. And then it issued a correction to say the case actually came from the Camden County Sheriff's Office. It's for those reasons Bryan's attorney called the investigation a, quote, ruse to justify the denial of bond for Mr. Bryan in a motion filed last month. The motion goes on to say that the investigation is part of a prosecutor's, quote, dirty tricks playbook. In that motion, Bryan's attorney says the victim has written a letter asking the DA to close the investigation and that she wants Bryan released from jail. The prosecution responded last Friday with a court motion to say this court exercised sound discretion to deny bond and there is no reason for reconsideration.
So to this day, the public doesn't know a lot of specific details about those sex crime allegations. The GBI doesn't comment on pending investigations, and Camden County Sheriff's Office has told WTOC it doesn't have any incident reports that involve Bryan in those allegations. WTOC reached out to DA Jackie Johnson several times to ask what her plans are with the case. Her voicemail is full and she has not returned our calls. Well, Johnson's time in office is coming to an end, so it remains to be seen if the sex crimes case will go to the new DA. As we've reported, Johnson lost her bid for re-election. Her term ends this year.
Corruption played a big part in the initial police investigation into Arbery's death. And while he says the family weighs its options on whether or not to sue, another family already has sued for how the police handled a different case in Glenn County.
It was filed by the mother of a woman who was killed by a former Glenn County police officer. In it are allegations of negligence and corruption in the police department that goes back years.
The lawsuit is linked to the 2018 double murder and suicide carried out by former Glenn County police officer Lieutenant Robert Sasser. Katie's mother, Deborah E. Gann, filed the lawsuit. The family's Atlanta-based attorney, Darren Penn, says what happened to Katie is far more than a deadly domestic violence case.
It's systemic of a police department that doesn't follow its rules, doesn't follow its policies, doesn't follow guidelines, and really has a sense of, it appears, at least from the evidence, of protecting its own over the interests of those in the public.
Are you kidding me? You was just at my house today.
This happened about a month before Katie's murder. It appears to show Glenn County police officers laughing with Lieutenant Sasser, who in this moment is a suspect.
Probably use it a police officer now versus a...
Katie says Sasser showed up at her house, tried to break in, and then threatened to kill her.
Why are you here at my house? You are not allowed in my house. He is not allowed in my house.
The lawsuit contends that the department systematically protected Robert Sasser, and had it intervened sooner, it could have prevented Katie and Hall's deaths.
Mike, the issue is about changing a police culture, something a 2019 Glenn County grand jury felt so strongly about after its investigation into the county police department, where there were allegations of cover-ups, abuse of power, and lack of accountability.